You're listening to the Surgeons of Horror podcast. Welcome to the Surgeons of Horror podcast. Its purpose is to dissect horror films, one screen legend and franchise at a time. I'm your host and lead surgeon, Paul Farrell. And doing things slightly differently this time around with a bit of a special podcast dedicated to an Australian female writer-director, Heidi Lee Douglas, who's currently working on a crowdfunding project to get her latest venture, Devil Woman, up and running. So without further ado, we go over to the interview now and have a little listen to who exactly Heidi Lee Douglas is and what Devil Woman is all about. Enjoy. Well, hello, Heidi. Thanks for joining us on the Surgeons of Horror podcast. It's a great kind of honour to have you on board to talk about your project. So, welcome aboard.
Thanks, Paul. That's great to be here. Thank you.
Not a problem. So I thought, what we would do is, delve into, before we get talking, you're here to talk about Devil Woman, but before we get to that, it might serve well if the audience out there get a bit of a history on your background and where you've come from through your career, and maybe getting the kind of idea of the journey that you've taken in order to get to where Devil Woman is at now. So in the early stages, you worked for Australia's largest conservation organisation known as the Wilderness Society. How did this time when you were working there affect your approach to filmmaking?
Well, it was a very empowering period of my life in some ways, and in other ways, quite torturous. It was empowering because I was employed as a one-woman band, basically, to make films all around Australia. So I, wrote, shot, edited, made the DVDs, did the color grading, the sound mixing, everything for 6 years for lots and lots of short films. And that also involved working with different community groups and campaigners, Aboriginal elders, to come up with the story. Like, they would tell me what was going on, and then I would develop that into a narrative for an audience. So, there were a lot of real life horrors that I was experiencing. When you empathize with people who have their land at risk, it's emotionally torturous. But I mean, mostly the horrific side of it came about when I got sued for my work by Guns, as part of a large court case, $6.5 million they were chasing us for. So that then made me part of that story, and was very unexpected. Yeah. So I guess to put that kind of the court case to one side a minute and focus on the workload that you were going through. So it was being a one-person outfit. I guess that's put you in good stead for these projects that would come later down the track. I mean, there is that kind of expression about the hard yards is where you kind of learn your craft. So when you're kind of deep in it, I mean, I guess that's the case with a lot of kind of independent filmmakers too. You kind of have to know every facet of the job in order to kind of create the vision that you want to create. I think my next question does lead on to, I guess, around the court case that kind of came out. Because in 2008, I've got here, you established what would become Dark Lake Productions, and this ultimately led you to directing, as you already hinted, a very personal story with the documentary Defendant 5. Can you tell us a little bit about that story and what compelled you to tell that story to the wider world? Well, I'd been in Tasmania already for a couple of years. I went down there as an independent filmmaker to make a doco about the logging issue. I was invited down there by friends who had worked with on an independent film in South Australia about land rights and the Aboriginal communities, through working both as an independent filmmaker and then eventually as a paid filmmaker for the Wilderness Society. And then, I worked very hard to get that story out internationally about the logging issue, and we got a lot of traction in 2004 internationally. I've, got my footage on lots of docos around the world, as well as made a short that was seen very widely. And then we got some forest protected, 170,000 hectares. John Howard agreed to that, and then boom, like a week later, Guns sued us.
Right.
Oh, sorry, it wasn't a week later. It was actually a couple of months later. We got the promise from John Howard, and then a couple of months later, Guns launched a writ against us. So Guns was the big logging company, and so that was a huge shock. So there was 20 of us involved in the court case, including Senator Bob Brown, the leaders of the Wilderness Society, Greens state leaders, Greens Party state leaders and politicians, a whole bunch of people, a dentist, a doctor, student activists. And as soon as that happened, as soon as I received the writ, I sort of knew that it was so ironic that they'd sued a filmmaker as part of this, because it was my obligation to record that story.
Yes.
So that was in 2004. The doco didn't actually come out to 2014 because I spent 5 years in court with them. Eventually, we won, and through that time, I recorded as much as I could. I recorded video diaries of myself, of my reaction to particular events. But then it took 5 years to actually get the funding to make the film as well after that fact. So.
Sure. Wow. Okay.
But in some ways that was good, though, because by then more of the story had played out and Guns had actually gone into receivership.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a lot. Obviously, like a lot of development and changes had come about over that period of time. But that must have been kind of like an understatement probably, but a really stressful time for you.
Yeah.
To have your work criticised in such a fashion. Do you think that kind of I'm going off script here from the questions, but do you think that kind of gave you I guess a bit more backbone when it comes to your work and the strength and conviction to carry out your thought process and your vision to its end?
Well, that's a good question, Paul. It's not something that I've directly linked in my mind, but when you say it like that, actually it's probably true, because I mean, the thing about the court case is that Guns, they weren't suing me for like defamation. They weren't, like, there was nothing I'd done wrong with my films. They were basically just suing me for having been there filming at particular incidents.
Sure.
So in some ways, the fact that I was sued was a great endorsement for the power of the work that I'd been creating, that they had singled me out as, a leader amongst the community. And a lot of people said to me that they were jealous that I'd gotten sued, or that kind of weird thing.
Yeah.
And even the other day I was at a party in Sydney and the author Julia Lee was there, and we met on the dance floor, and she found out that I was one of the defendants, and she gave me this huge hug and was so kind about, saying, well, if you do nothing else in your life, thank you. That's an amazing thing that you did for, the world, And I highly respect her. She's the author of The Hunter, she's director of Sleeping Beauty. And so having that recognition, from peers back then and even now, whilst at the same time I was, definitely being persecuted by this huge company with so many resources and the government at their back. But the stubbornness to keep on going despite, what seems like unsurmountable odds, I think is good standing for an independent filmmaker.
For sure, absolutely. So like when we kind of look at your passion as a whole, I mean, as is evidenced from Defendant 5, part of that passion comes with social change, but you also have another area that you're interested in, which is this elevated genre films. And your next project in your career would be that short feature called Little Lamb, which is a gothic thriller set in early colonisation of Tasmania. What is it about Australia's dark history that draws you to this kind of subject, do you think?
Well, in particular, that story came about because when I was being sued, there was a couple of things. Basically, I started writing horror as a hobby to help me deal with the day-to-day life that I was living. And so I came up with this archetypal story about this man-eating mermaid, and wrote my first feature script, and that actually won some awards and stuff. And I got interested in producing that from David Hannay, but I was so involved with the court case that I couldn't take it on at that point.
Yeah.
But whilst I was, during that period of time, I used to go and visit the Female Factory, which is the real-life in situ prison that the convict women lived in, which was in the middle of suburban Hobart, basically, in South Hobart. So I would walk past that most days. I would often go in and sit in there, and I think I felt they didn't have a voice. They were victims of oppression through institutions that they didn't have power over, and I felt like that myself at that time. Were being sued, being fairly powerless in that whole equation. Because you have to understand, like, Dunnes was like the biggest company in the Southern Hemisphere, the biggest logging company, and they had the back of the state and federal government. I had like my home at risk and my job, and it did feel very, very powerless at that time. And I think that created this sense of empathy with those convict women. And also because I was a bit of a rebel, and so were my peers, my female peers. So I often imagine that if I had been born, 200 years earlier, I probably would have been a convict woman.
Yeah, right, yes.
Because I probably wouldn't have shut up and told the lie.
Oh, man. I mean, I guess, like, speaking of that, like, so with Little Lamb, it does centre primarily on a young convict woman, and I guess that's your in point as a writer to kind of connect with this character called Louisa. Why do you think filmmakers and storytellers are drawn to the horrors of social conflict at the moment? It seems to be quite a common theme. Yeah,
I mean, I was having an argument actually on Facebook last night with some people, a friendly argument about this, where they were saying that there's been, they hated the term elevated genre because they feel like there's always been really, socially conscious horror films, but that these days people are scared to label their films horror from a marketing perspective. And I did notice that with Jordan Peele's film Get Out, that he labels as a social thriller rather than a horror film. And I mean, I think the lines are quite blurred, really, between what is horror and what is thriller. I called Little Lamb a gothic thriller because it didn't seem like it fitted into, it seems a bit outside of the main horror sort of genre. But then, Brony Kidd, who I was sort of discussing this with last night, she was like, no, it's definitely horror. You think about the Bluebeard story that it was loosely based on, which is a horrific folktale. And she's right. So, I mean, but why people drawn more to the elevated genre, I think, is really because people are bored of seeing superhero movies, and we realize that there's so much going on in our world that's politically incendiary, and we want to understand that. And so to actually dramatize that in an interesting way. I find documentaries are less accessible to people than drama. So I think that's where I've come over to the drama, because I felt like, if to reach a wider audience and to be entertaining and get people to think is more the greater goal.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess that kind of leads ourselves into your latest venture, Devil Woman. Which you've described as a smart horror that centers on human conflict over our relationship with the environment. I mean, to me, that feels like such a compelling subject that needs to be voiced anyway, regardless. And it ties in what you're saying about documentaries don't tend to lend as much weight or kind of connect with people than dramas do. So you're almost telling this kind of documentary-filled story in a drama environment in itself. But what is it, do you think, that makes Devil Woman the right story for this message?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't want it to be, it's not too overt. I wouldn't say it's even as overt as Get Out in terms of its, wearing the issue on its sleeve. I think I don't want to, because I come from a political background, I'm trying to also escape that to some degree. Although it's part of who I am as well. So, and it's a strength that I have. So in some ways, this film actually brings together the narratives of my career because it draws on everything that I've done to this point.
Sure.
Why is it the right film for this kind of issue? I mean, I think there could be many films made around this issue, but I think Devil Woman in itself, like, very strong female leads.
Yes.
But I've also ensured that all of the characters have a lot of grey areas. It's not black and white.
Yeah.
I want everyone to be able to empathize with all the different characters and the push and pull of why somebody might be wanting to log the forest, why someone might be wanting to protect it, why somebody wants to study it, but then overall, the power of nature being greater than all of the personal agendas, I think that's how I feel about the world at the moment. We sit here arguing about climate change, whether it exists or not, but then, mass floods and heat waves and, it just kicks us on the ass.
Yeah. Gosh, yeah. I know, and that's the thing. It's hard to kind of find how people can believe that there is no such thing as climate change when we're having such the stats are kind of there proving the point, but there seems to be this. I don't know whether it is blind optimism, blind kind of insight to it all, or it is purely. I'm trying to be as delicate as I can. The powers that be that have other interests in mind that choose to ignore it.
Well, that's what I would say. It's basically, there must be some levels of corruption. It's either corruption because people are being given handouts, politicians, or get not, or backroom deals or whatever. Or I also think that religion has something to blame for it as well.
Sure, okay.
Because I think people believe that. Some religious people believe that we were put on this earth, to be the rulers of the earth, and so it's an arrogant attitude that's been passed down intergenerationally.
Yeah, that's a very good point, actually. I mean, that arcs right back to the Genesis in the Bible and the very beginning of time, according to Christian religion, anyway. In that respect, that I'm referring to. An interesting point,
Devil Woman is actually like on a deeper level. It's actually a reversal of the Adam and Eve story.
Okay, right.
Because and Adam and Eve takes a bite of the apple.
Yes.
And then gains knowledge and is therefore responsible, really, for the fall of humanity in some regards. Whereas in Devil Woman, she gets bitten,
right,
and by nature. And I don't want to give away the punchline, but there is a new beginning for for civilization.
Right, intriguing. I guess look, I think that's a good point, actually, to quickly mention to people about partly why we're doing this as well, having a chat with you, because you've got Devil Woman's up there on Pozible at the moment, where you're trying to get some financial support in order to get this project made. How can people find you, and what do you need from people out there that might be listening to the podcast?
Well, there's two ways to find us. We have a Devil Woman Facebook page that's very active. We'll be posting at least one post a day in the lead up to the shoot, which is scheduled in 3 weeks, as well as all through the shoot and afterwards, what behind the scenes of making the film. So that's just Devil Woman Film at Facebook. And then the Pozible campaign, it's POZIBLE, Pozible /projects/Devil Woman Film. And we're halfway to our crowdfunding target. So we needed to raise $10,000 to cover the hard costs of insurance, safety coordinator, stunt coordinator, camera and lighting hire, just to make it professional and safe for the volunteer crew. I was hoping to get away with making the film on my savings of $4,000, just covering food and fuel and everything for people. But I didn't quite realize how complicated the stunt scenes were. And special effects makeup was the other thing that we have to cover. So even though I tried to write a very contained script, there are some elements that are we require, high-end professionals to do those, and they don't come for free, unfortunately. So, yeah, we're about halfway to meeting our crowdfunding target, and hopefully by the time this comes out, more than halfway.
Yes.
But we definitely need people to pitch in and help us, and we've got lots of great rewards to entice people, from everything from getting your name on the credit to downloads of my old films, to great Devil Woman t-shirt, all the way up to corporate sponsorship and party rewards to come to our premieres, cast and crew parties, and an associate producer credit, you can get for $1,000. Which we had someone pick up yesterday. Yeah, nice, and she's amazing.
Awesome.
Author Courtney Collins, who's actually done a lot of work in the screen industry. So, and she's behind me. She said she's been looking for some way to support me, and this is it. So she's going to work with me on the script as well.
Awesome.
So it's fantastic.
That's great news. Yeah. Great news. That's awesome, Heidi. I will, by the by, put these links on the bottom of our webpage that we'll be placing the podcast on. So those people that are listening, you can go down there and check that out. When we look at Devil Woman, as we said, it's a horror film. So for those horror enthusiasts out there salivating at the prospect of this movie, it has got like zombies and shapeshifters and some kind of other components in the mix there, which we're not going to give the game away on. Tonally, you've though likened it to 28 Days Later. What is it in particular about this movie that you feel connects Devil Woman
to 28 Days Later?
Yeah.
It's a few things. I mean, I think I saw 28 Days Later as I was still in my activist zone in my life,
sure.
And the fact that it was about the man-made rage virus and the human culpability of that descent, that apocalypse.
Yes.
There's a strong connection with Devil Woman with that. I also really love tonally the light and dark shades in 28 Days Later, and I love the exploration of character as well, and who was evil and who was not evil. What is the greatest evil is humans, probably more than the zombie itself. So with what those military men do with the women at the end of the film. So I think there's a lot of complexities and layers to that film that I really liked, as well as the style that it was shot in, handheld, quickly shot using the resources they had available. And I think you feel all of that when you watch the film.
Yeah, cool. No, it sounds really good.
It's not too contrived.
Yes. We mentioned 28 Days Later, but are there any other horror movies that have personally inspired you along the way that we can see, not necessarily, I guess, obviously embedded through Devil Woman, but you might see little shades of here or there that's influenced you over time?
Yeah, I was thinking about that quite a lot last night after reviewing your questions, and I'm really quite agnostic when it comes to my influences. Like I spent a lot of time with parents who were teachers, so a lot of time going to museums and art galleries growing up. So a lot of my inspiration has been through political history, human history, artists, classic art and modern art. And as a family, we used to watch. We were either basically traveling, going to art galleries, camping in the bush, or watching movies and discussing them.
Yes.
But we didn't watch a lot of horror.
Okay.
My parents weren't really into watching horror with kids. So, growing up, it wasn't really until I went to university and I studied film theory that I really discovered, like, German expressionism and Hitchcock and even Tarantino and then that led me on to Robert Rodriguez and Dusk Till Dawn and but like the films I liked growing up as a kid were things like Labyrinth or The Dark Crystal or Conan or Star Wars, and a lot of them have that sort of light and dark sort of exploration. So and with the fantasy element to them, and actually quite scary when I've got kids now and try and show them to kids, and you actually have they're a lot scarier, I think, than a lot of kids' movies these days.
I completely agree. Dark Crystal has got some seriously effed up stuff going on in there that which, you know, you kind of look back on and go, God, because I remember being really quite scared of that one as a kid, and you're just like, how did they actually get that made? You know, but I love that film. It's still kind of, I would still kind of highlight that one as a great kids film. And you're right, there does seem to be a bit of a shine away from, I guess, the scare factor in kids movies these days. There was an exception to the rule a few years ago with there was an animation called Monster House, which kind of came out, which was like the old haunted house kind of story where, you know, and I thought that kind of embodied some kind of a bit more kind of leaning towards, you know, the scare factor of yesteryear. Something I just wanted to, that you were just talking about just there, though, that I wanted to touch base on you on, was that you were talking about how you went and visited art galleries and things as a kid. Was there anything in those kind of, is there a particular artist in that sense, not necessarily, you know, deviating away from the celluloid kind of art form, but more because canvas led? Is there somebody that's kind of inspired you visually on that sense that kind of triggers something in you that may kind of come out in your work?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the early Australian artists, I you know, spent a lot of time staring at those as a kid, like, and getting transported, I guess, to that early colonialism and the hardship of what that meant. And also, even more recently, like, I used to spend quite a bit of time at the Tasmanian Art Gallery, and there's a lot of really interesting colonial work there, which show how the British eye was really struggling to comprehend this strange Australian landscape with these twisted trees, and you know, and they're kind of naive. They sort of trying to be British, but they can't be, and they're sort of caught in this weird struggle to represent what it is they're seeing. So I mean, I wouldn't pinpoint necessarily, like, you know, one artist as being an influence above all of the artists, but all of that sort of early representation of Australian. I mean, I just love history, and that's kind of how I got into doco making. Basically, is that it became a way to, you know, engage on a present tense basis with history unfolding, as well as being able to do research in the past and, you know, and present. And I think that's where a lot of my inspiration for my genre stuff comes from, is mythology.
Yes,
you know, ancient Greek mythology or Nordic mythology, or, you know, the shapeshifter stories where they came, folk tales, you know, the Grimms, but prior to when the brothers Grimm picked up the stories, like what's her name, Clarissa Pinkola Estes' work, the Jungian and psychoanalysis, who's looked at, like, where did these folk tales come from, and a lot of them were matriarchal to start out with, but if we go right back to them, they've got a much deeper message. And I think as a storyteller, I feel like you know, we have a responsibility to work on that level. Really.
One thing I just moving on to the next question that I kind of feel like I think it's of worthy note, is that you have an all-female crew heading up Devil Woman, and the timing can be better placed, I feel, for women to have their say in horror as well. And like I've mentioned here, with, you know, we've got the likes of Jennifer Kent's The Babadook to kind of reference a more Australian kind of themed director, and even the recent kind of XX film that was released along with Karen Kusama's The Invitation, and she was one of the female directors associated with XX. Why do you think audiences are now starting to finally sit up and listen to these great female filmmakers? Because it does feel like it's like, what, the last 2, maybe 3 years that women are starting to become a bit. I mean, we're a far cry, don't get me wrong, from where we should be with this, but it does feel like there is a shift happening at the moment.
Well, I think it comes from a few things. I mean, I don't know exactly where it started. I know that I got greatly encouraged by The Stranger with My Face film festival that Baroni Kidd and Rebecca Thompson were running down in Tasmania.
Yep.
and through them, they've helped to educate me more about horror. And that I think that, look, the audience is basically the ones losing out by not having enough representation of female writers, directors.
Yeah.
And I think that we've seen the films like The Babadook and The Invitation, and the Soskers, American Mary, now with Julia Ducournau's,
Yep.
Raw, Alice Lowe's Prevenge, Maddie Doe's work that she's doing, Dearest Sister, that these are beautiful voices that talk in a profound way about, important but dark, stories. And we want to be pushed. We want to see more interesting stuff. So, I mean, as an audience member, I find that their work incredibly exciting.
Yeah, same. Yeah. It just seems so kind of strange that, I mean, I guess it's not because of we've been living in such a male-dominated kind of world, but it does seem strange that that half the population haven't had the chance to kind of really push this to the foreground and have their voice there, to speak to the same kind of population. But you're right. There's so many kind of, like, you were listing so many kind of great movies in the mix there. American Mary stood out to me, and Raw as well. There's some really kind of powerful movies that's coming out, and I welcome it. I really think it's a great kind of moment of change that's coming around because of that. And that's what excites me about Devil Woman as well. I think there's we mentioned about the social kind of commentary that's going to be going on there. Within that film, but also you've got this kind of great opportunity to kind of have this conversation from a female-led point of view as well, and I just think it's got because of that, there's a lot going for it, which excites me as a fan of not just horror film but just film in general, and I can't wait for to see this kind of get made and get out there, And I guess that kind of leads to my last question around it, because hopefully, like as we said, you'll get the financial support to get this Devil Woman off the ground. But what are you looking for to do next? You're talking about that you're going to be shooting this thing in 3 weeks' time. So what are you looking to try and achieve, I guess, once the cameras start rolling and beyond?
Well, with Devil Woman in particular, it's a self-contained short film, but it has the prospect of being developed into a feature, or even a feature/web series in the same way that Skinford has been in other projects.
Yes.
But it couldn't be micro-budget because, knowing what I know now about just how much it's taking to make the short, it needs good special effects.
Yep.
It needs it's remote locations, all that stuff. So, but I do have. So the aim of that is international film festivals, and using that as leverage to then help get my next projects up, including a longer form of Devil Woman. But then I've also got a micro-budget feature that I'm developing to shoot at the end of this year in Sydney, which is like a post-apocalyptic story, basically, about a couple of kids on the run in this wasteland outside the city, which is basically set in the area where I've just moved to recently, which is near the airport.
Okay.
There's this whole sort of like wasteland, wetland area around here that lends itself beautifully to that narrative.
No, I see.
And so, talking to like Sophie Matheson, who's a filmmaker runs WIFT and the FFS festival, she made a micro-budget feature, and she said, look, draw on the locations that you have to hand, basically. So that's what that story is. And then I've got a longer... I've been working for 2 years on a feature version, basically, of Little Lamb, which is convict western. It got support from Screen Tasmania. It got shortlisted for the Sundance Screenwriters Lab. It's been shortlisted for a bunch of stuff. And but the problem with that is that even though the script's rocking along, we've got a fantastic team attached to it, including Chris Brown, who made The Proposition, and Marcus Gillizo, Fiona McConaughey as the producers. Unfortunately, because Jennifer Kent's come in and making The Nightingale, which is a convict woman film, the funding bodies, risk adverse, are like, oh my God, there's one colonial female story. That's enough.
Yeah. Because you can only tell one of those stories,
Oh,
You don't
yeah.
want to
Yes.
confuse your audience.
Totally. We've only told one male colonial story, right? No.
Oh,
So
far out.
I know,
Yeah.
and like, so you think women in film thing is people just bang on about it because
Yeah.
like I've seen some men posting things that like, oh, women just say that because they're not so successful. It's really based on merit. If there's merit, then you get the success. Well, it's not that simple, and I know that from being on the coalface of these decisions, that it's not rational. What a bunch of people the decisions they will make that affect a female director are very different. They're very risk adverse, basically, when it comes to female-led stories.
Yes.
So there's still a long way to go, to change that.
Mm. Yeah, no.
Unfortunately,
I completely agree. I feel like there is so much road ahead for us to travel yet, which is unbelievable. But it feels like we are starting to get on the right road now.
I hope so. I mean, one of the stupid things that I was really angry about when I recently got knocked back for development funding for that second draft of that feature was that the board, and I won't say which body it was, but the board said, well, because it's a female protagonist, it's for a female audience and women don't like violence. Now, there's so many things wrong with that statement, and like from I watch male-led films all the time, and I don't have a problem empathizing with a male character. You don't say because Jason's Bourne is in it, only men are going to go and see it. In fact, like Todd Brown from XYZ was saying with the film XX, more than 50% of the horror audience is female. So and they also watch male or female-led films.
Yeah, that's right.
And they like, women like violence. It's I just think it's such a stereotype to expect women to only like rom-coms or soft versions of stories. It really perplexes me how those perceptions are still around today.
No, that's right.
And they're the people making the decisions about what films get made, and therefore that's why we have this starvation of these stories, this lack of them, because of the conservative decisions that are being made about what films actually, are able to get made. And I know Jennifer Kent had a freaking nightmare to get the Babadook made all through Screen Australia. She was treated by some people abysmally, but then look at what she's done. She believed in herself, her producer believed in her, and she's had that international recognition. So, that thing we were talking about before about stubbornness of activist filmmaker, just keep on going, believe in yourself when you know on your gut instinct that what you've got is worth doing. That's what I have to keep using to drive me, But the other really nice thing about running a crowdfunding campaign, as I've never done that before, is that it's the audience coming and saying, we're validating this. We want this.
Yes.
So already I've had so much beautiful support and messages of support, as well as financial assistance being sent through to encourage me to keep going with Devil Woman.
Yeah, and I kind of I commend that too, and support that notion. I think I think to kind of, I guess, to round things up, we've seen it before about how any project is made because of the strength of conviction and passion that the filmmaker has in order to get that done. And you're with Devil Woman, as you said, you're in that kind of crowd space environment at the moment, and that kind of relies on that passion being conveyed. And I think this is there. It's evident, within the team that this is that the passion is there to kind of to get this done. And I think because of that, you're going to get there.
Hope so.
Yeah,
we will.
You got it's that. Yeah, no, you will. You're going to get there because it's that belief, in what you can do, and you guys know you can do it. You know that it's an achievable project and that's at your fingertips. So and there's no doubt that you guys have the ability to kind of pull this off. That never comes into question, does it? It's not, because you guys know your own strengths. and where you'll be able to kind of succeed in that. It's just kind of having that extra weight in order to support those strengths, you know. But no, I think you're going to get there, and I look, I wish you all the success. And I'm just going to remind people that are listening there that, you know, just click on the links that I'll set up on the bottom of the web page. But you just head over to the Facebook Devil Woman website, and also the pozible link as well that we've got down there to if you kind of want to kind of give this project every bit of push that we need to kind of get this kind of stuff made. Now's your chance to do so, particularly as you know, it lends itself to the horror kind of market, but it's more importantly, it's an Australian voice, and it's a female Australian voice that's there, which is much needed out there. So get out there and support this film. I really kind of can't emphasise how much I wish you success in this project, Heidi. Thanks so much for kind of taking some time to have a chat with us on Surgeons of Horror podcast.
Great, thanks, Paul. I appreciate it.
Yeah, totally.
You're listening to the Surgeons of Horror podcast. Music supplied by Peter Nezik. For more discussions or podcasts, head over to surgeonsofhorror.com or head over to our Facebook and Twitter sites for the latest news and updates.